The wind whispered through the narrow streets of Green Valley, carrying the weight of a heavy silence. The amber glow of the streetlights cast long shadows, stretching across the pavement as if time itself was holding its breath. Sergeant Tom Miller had finished his final patrol of the night, his cruiser gliding through the fog, when something caught his eye. A figure, sitting motionless by the rusted gates of the town's animal shelter, stood alone in the cold night air. As Tom approached, the vehicle's headlights illuminated the dog's thin, emaciated form. It was a German shepherd, eyes fixed in the direction of Tom's car. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze as their gazes locked. Tom's heart stopped, his breath caught in his throat. Shadow? The dog, though visibly weakened, held a dignity Tom recognized in an instant, even after years of separation. His mind raced, but there was only one thought that mattered. It can't be. It can't be him. Welcome to the HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through dog stories. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video. And if you have any stories about my loyal friend, please share them with us. Tom parked the cruiser and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. As he approached, the dog's ears twitched and a faint tail waggle stirred, just enough to send a shock of recognition through Tom's veins. A faint, familiar spark. The dog's coat was scarred, its frame gaunt, yet the recognition in his eyes was unmistakable. Tom reached out with trembling fingers, brushing aside the layers of dirt caked into the worn collar. The engraved tag gleamed faintly under the streetlight. Shadow, property of Tom Miller. It had been 3 years. 3 long, agonizing years since he had last seen Shadow. 3 years since the warehouse raid when chaos had swallowed his partner whole. The pain, the emptiness, the unknown, they had nearly broken him. And now, Shadow was back. But the sight of his partner, battered and broken, sent waves of anger flooding through Tom. The familiar strength was still there, but it was buried beneath scars, both physical and emotional, that would never heal easily. The dog's body was a map of cruelty. The rush of emotions was overwhelming. Relief, yes, but it was quickly followed by something far more intense: rage. Who could do this to a dog like Shadow? To a dog who had been more than a partner, more than a friend? He had been a family. Who did this to you, buddy? Tom whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow gave a small whimper, his eyes meeting Tom's with something different: fear, trust, and the remnants of pain. Tom didn't hesitate. His hand reached into his jacket for his phone, fingers shaking as he dialed a number he had hoped never to dial again. Dr. Emily Chin's number. He needed help. Shadow needed help. But before he could speak, Shadow let out a low growl, his eyes narrowing toward the shadows ahead, as if he sensed something or someone lurking in the darkness. "Come on, boy," Tom murmured, looking toward the shelter as he moved to help Shadow into the car. Something wasn't right. The eerie stillness of the night seemed to hold a deeper meaning now, and a warning echoed in the back of Tom's mind. Shadow wasn't just back. Something had brought him home, something far darker than Tom had ever imagined. Tom drove through the quiet streets, his mind racing with questions. How had Shadow survived all this time? Why had he been returned, scarred and broken, yet still alive? There was a story here, a story that had been hidden in the shadows, and Tom was going to uncover it, no matter the cost. But what Tom didn't know, as he turned onto the familiar road that led to his house, was that this was just the beginning. The journey of healing, both for Shadow and for himself, was about to take them down a path filled with unexpected twists, betrayal, and a darkness that neither of them could have anticipated. In the early hours of the morning, as the first rays of dawn began to peek through the curtains of Tom's kitchen, he sat with Shadow, watching his partner sleep. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, a quiet reminder that the road to recovery would be long. But for the first time in 3 years, Tom allowed himself to believe in the possibility of peace. The morning sun filtered through Tom's kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the room. Tom sipped his black coffee, his gaze fixed on Shadow, who was curled up on the living room rug, soundly asleep. It was a sight he had longed for in the months since his partner's disappearance. And yet, despite the relief of having Shadow back, a deep sadness lingered. Shadow was home, but the man who had always been his anchor was not the same. It had been 8 years since Sarah, Tom's wife, had died in that car accident. The drunk driver had taken more than her life. He had stolen their future together and left Tom with an emptiness that had only been filled by the bond he shared with Shadow. Shadow had been there through the darkest moments, the quiet nights when grief threatened to swallow him whole. They had been more than K9 and Handler. They had been family. And now, Tom was forced to confront the truth. This family had been broken by a tragedy, by time, and by the betrayal of those he had trusted. Shadow's return, with his battered body and haunted eyes, was a painful reminder of everything they had lost, everything they had endured. Tom leaned back in his chair, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. The memories of their time together on the force flooded back. Training sessions, late-night patrols, victories and defeats. The victories, especially the ones where they had saved lives, brought pride and comfort. But it was the moments of quiet connection when they would sit together on the porch after a long day that he missed the most. Those were the moments that had helped him find the strength to keep going. But now, Shadow was no longer the dog he had once known. The trauma, the abuse, and the years of separation had left their mark. Dr. Emily Chin, the veterinarian who had never given up hope, had warned him that the healing process would take time. And yet, as Tom watched Shadow's still form, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more beneath the surface, something Shadow was trying to communicate. It was in the way Shadow flinched at loud noises, the way he tensed when anyone approached him too quickly, as if expecting to be hurt. It was in the way he would tremble in the corners of the room, his eyes darting nervously, constantly on alert. This was not the confident, fearless police dog who had once taken down suspects and found missing children. This was a dog broken by years of abuse, trying to find his place in a world that had betrayed him. Tom knew that Shadow's recovery wouldn't be easy. He had seen dogs come back from trauma before. Some recovered fully, others never did. But what Shadow had gone through wasn't just physical abuse. It was the systematic destruction of everything that made him who he was: a police dog, a protector, a loyal partner. And the hardest part was knowing that there were people out there who had orchestrated this, people who had stolen Shadow's purpose and twisted it for their own gain. Tom's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Detective Martha Wilson. The shelter's records are a mess. You were right to keep digging. We need to talk. Tom sighed, a heavy weight settling in his chest. He had known for a long time that something wasn't right at that shelter. The way the funding had mysteriously tripled in the past few years. The strange circumstances surrounding Shadow's disappearance. And now, Shadow's return had only raised more questions. Questions that Tom couldn't ignore. "Come on, buddy," Tom muttered softly, rising from his chair. "We've got work to do." As Tom opened the door to his cruiser, Shadow stood up, his movements slow but determined. The dog's eyes met Tom's, and, for a brief moment, Tom saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of the dog he had once known. Shadow was still in there, somewhere fighting to come back, and Tom wasn't going to give up on him. They drove to the animal shelter together, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. The facility was just as run down as Tom remembered it, peeling paint on the walls, rusting metal fences, and the scent of something unpleasant hanging in the air. Tom parked the cruiser outside and stepped out, Shadow following close behind, his posture alert but cautious. The shelter director, Deborah Waters, was there, her tired face barely showing any emotion as she greeted Tom. "I've been looking into the shelter's records," Tom began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "Something doesn't add up. The funding, the inspection reports, and Shadow. He came from here. Someone here is responsible for what happened to him." Deborah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting nervously as Tom spoke. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sergeant." We're just trying to help the animals here. Tom didn't believe her. He could feel it. The same unease he had felt ever since Shadow's disappearance. There was something off about this place. Something that Tom couldn't ignore. You don't get it, do you? Tom said, his voice low, but his eyes never leaving Deborah's. Shadow didn't just disappear. He didn't just wander off. Someone took him. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Deborah flinched as if the words had struck her. Tom cut her off. I'm going to find out who did this to him. And I'm not going to stop until I get answers. As he turned to leave, Shadow stood at his side, his eyes scanning the area with the focus of a trained canine. It wasn't just the shelter that Shadow was watching. It was everything. His training, his loyalty, and his instincts had never truly left him. Even after everything that had happened to him, Shadow was still Tom's partner. And together, they were going to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The days following Shadow's return were a blur of meetings, investigations, and a growing sense of unease that hung over Tom like a dark cloud. He had always trusted his instincts, but now those instincts were telling him that something far more sinister than simple animal cruelty was at play. There were whispers in the halls of the Green Valley Police Department, and Tom couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that the shadows were closing in on him once more. Despite the mounting pressure, Tom remained resolute. The more he uncovered about the shelter, the more he realized how deep the corruption ran. The records, the strange funding, the missing dogs, all of it pointed to something much larger than he had anticipated. And someone in his own department was involved. Tom spent hours going over the shelter's financials with Jack Thompson, the young officer who had become a trusted ally in the investigation. They dug through paperwork, making copies of everything, and Jack's persistence started to pay off. "I've got something," Jack said, his voice low as he tapped a few keys on his laptop. Deborah Waters, she didn't start getting paid until 2 years ago. Before that, she was just listed as a volunteer. And there's something strange about the facility's inspection records. Every time, a new inspector, and some of their names don't even exist. Tom leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. "Who's pulling the strings here?" he murmured, more to himself than Jack. But Jack's expression was serious. "There's more," Jack continued, pulling up a new file. "I ran a background check on Deborah. She's connected to James Reynolds, the financial advisor to the shelter. And Reynolds? He's got ties to other shelters across the state. Shelters that have all experienced mysterious fires and strange disappearances. It looks like this whole thing is linked." Tom's blood ran cold. It wasn't just animal abuse. It was an operation, a carefully orchestrated scheme that had been going on for years, and it involved people Tom thought he could trust. He had to get to the bottom of it. But with every new lead, it became clearer that this wasn't just about saving Shadow. This was about bringing down a criminal network that had infiltrated the very department he had spent his life serving. Tom glanced over at Shadow, who was lying on the floor of the small office, his eyes fixed on the door. The dog was healing, but the scars, physical and emotional, were still there. Shadow had been through so much. But Tom knew that the bond they shared would be the key to uncovering the truth. "We're going to need backup," Tom said, his voice firm. "We can't do this alone." Later that day, Tom met with Detective Martha Wilson in her office. Martha had been a friend and mentor to Tom for years, and she was one of the few people who truly understood the depth of his connection to Shadow. She had seen him at his lowest, after Sarah's death, and had stood by him when the rest of the department doubted him. "You're not going to like this," Martha said, after Tom briefed her on what he and Jack had uncovered. "But I think we have a rat in the department. Someone has been covering this up from the inside. Chief Bennett's too calm about all of this. I've been watching him. He's been too controlled. It's like he knows something we don't." Tom felt a chill run through him. Chief Bennett had always been a steady presence in the department, but lately his behavior had been strange. There had been whispers about misplaced evidence, missed investigations, and a sudden shift in priorities. And now, with Shadow's return, Bennett's indifference felt like a warning. "We need to be careful," Martha continued, her voice steady. "There's something going on here that goes beyond just the shelter. Someone's using these dogs for something more than just trafficking, and I think Bennett's involved. Or at least he's covering for someone who is. Tom nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. We're going to need more than just suspicion. We need hard evidence. They spent the next few days gathering information. Jack continued to dig into the shelter's financials, while Martha used her connections in the department to track down any leads that might be useful. The more they uncovered, the more they realized just how far the conspiracy stretched. And as the pieces started to fall into place, a terrifying truth emerged. Shadow wasn't the only dog to disappear. There had been dozens, if not hundreds, of police dogs that had gone missing over the years, each one lost in the line of duty, their handlers left with nothing but empty spaces where their partners once stood. But as Tom began to piece together the investigation, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more hidden in the shadows. Someone was watching him, tracking his every move. And the more they uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Tom knew that they were getting closer to the truth, but with each step forward, it felt like the walls were closing in on him. The following morning, Tom stood outside Dr. Emily Chin's clinic, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. Shadow, at his side, sniffed the air, his tail wagging ever so slightly. They had come a long way since Shadow's return. The dog was still recovering, but every day was a small victory. He was no longer the broken animal who had stumbled out of the shelter. He was Tom's partner again, and that was all that mattered. But even as they stood together, Tom knew that this was only the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. We're going to finish this, Tom whispered to Shadow. The dog's ears perked up, his eyes brightening for the first time in weeks. Tom could feel it too, the weight of the past pressing down on them, but also the strength of their bond, something that could never be broken. The days were getting longer, and so were the hours Tom spent chasing the truth. What had begun as a search for his lost partner had turned into an all-out investigation into corruption, betrayal, and a criminal network operating right under their noses. Tom could feel the pressure mounting as they uncovered more and more about the animal shelter, its mysterious funding, and the ties between key figures in the community and law enforcement. But with each discovery, the stakes grew higher and the risks more dangerous. Tom had always prided himself on his ability to trust his instincts. But now his gut was telling him that the very people he had served alongside for years might be his enemies. Chief Bennett's behavior was becoming more erratic, and the support from the department was starting to dwindle. Officers who once trusted Tom were now keeping their distance. The smear campaign against him had already begun, and he could feel the isolation creeping in. One afternoon, as Tom and Shadow sat together in his office, he received a text from Jack. "I've found something. I need to show you." Tom didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys and motioned for Shadow to follow. The dog, ever alert, rose to his feet, his body tense as he followed Tom to the car. Tom wasn't sure what Jack had found, but he knew it was important. As they drove through the familiar streets of Green Valley, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on Tom's chest. They were so close to the truth, too close. In fact, and the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. At the station, Jack was waiting in a small, dimly lit room. His face was tense, his eyes scanning the door as Tom entered. "I've been going through the shelter's financial records," Jack said, his voice low, "and I found a few things that don't add up. Look at this." Jack handed Tom a stack of papers, each one detailing large wire transfers between the shelter and various shell companies. "These transfers don't make any sense," Jack continued. "They're being funneled through multiple accounts, offshore accounts, some of them. And the names attached to these transfers? They match some of the officers who've been acting strangely lately." Tom's heart raced as he looked through the documents. The names matched those of people in high-ranking positions in the department, people who had always been untouchable, and the amounts were staggering. This was no longer just a matter of animal cruelty. This was organized crime, and the law enforcement community was neck-deep in it. Tom looked up from the papers, his jaw set in determination. "We need to take this to Martha," he said. "She'll know what to do." Later that night, Tom, Jack, and Martha met in the quiet of the department's briefing room. They had to be careful. Too many eyes were on them now. The investigation had already drawn unwanted attention, and there were whispers about Tom's mental state and his obsession with his lost dog. But none of that mattered to Tom anymore. What mattered was getting to the truth. Martha listened carefully as Tom outlined the new evidence, her expression hardening with each passing word. "This is bigger than I thought," she said when Tom finished. "And it's not just about the shelter. These wire transfers, these shell companies, they point to something much more dangerous. There's a network here, Tom, and it's much bigger than we realized." She paused, her eyes meeting Tom's. "And you were right to trust Shadow. He's not just a victim here. He's been trying to tell us something all along. This dog, he's been gathering evidence." Tom nodded, his heart heavy with the realization. Shadow had always been more than just a partner. He was a witness, a key to unlocking the entire operation. And now, it was up to them to use that evidence before the walls closed in on them completely. But Tom knew it wouldn't be easy. The people they were up against were powerful. They had the resources to make this all go away. And if they couldn't act fast, the evidence would be buried forever. The next morning, as Tom and Shadow made their way through the department, something felt different. The atmosphere had changed. The air was thick with tension, and every officer they passed seemed to avert their gaze. The department that had once felt like a family now seemed like a foreign place, filled with suspicion and distrust. When Tom reached his desk, he found a manila envelope waiting for him. There was no return address. He opened it cautiously, his fingers trembling as he pulled out a stack of photos. They were of him, of his meetings with Jack, of his visits to Dr. Chin's clinic, of the quiet moments with Shadow as they walked through the neighborhood. The photos were a warning. Someone was watching him, watching them. Tom slammed the envelope onto his desk, his fists clenched. He had suspected that the walls were closing in, but now it was clear. The people who didn't want the truth to come out were getting desperate. He looked down at Shadow, who was lying beside his desk, his body tense, as if he could sense the danger. Tom reached down to scratch the dog's head. "We're not backing down, buddy," he whispered. "Not now. Not ever." Later that day, as Tom and Shadow left the station, they were followed. Tom caught sight of a black SUV trailing them at a distance. His heart sank. The game had changed. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated the cover-up, was making their move. Tom drove quickly, trying to lose the SUV in the winding streets of Green Valley. But the vehicle stayed with them, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror like a predator stalking its prey. Tom's grip tightened on the steering wheel as they approached the outskirts of town. He needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere they could regroup and plan their next move. "Hold on, Shadow," Tom murmured, his voice tight with determination. "We're going to make it out of this. Together." But just as he turned down a narrow alley, the black SUV pulled in behind them, blocking their exit. Tom's heart raced as he slammed on the brakes, his mind racing with possibilities. It was time to face the truth head-on. The moment Tom's foot slammed on the brake, the black SUV's headlights illuminated the alley, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him like dark hands reaching for the truth. His heart pounded in his chest as the vehicle blocked his only escape route. There was no turning back now, no more hiding in the shadows. The people behind the SUV, whoever they were, knew they were getting closer to being exposed. And now, they were making their move. Tom glanced over at Shadow, who sat poised at his side, eyes sharp, alert, ready for anything. His partner, battered and scarred, had come so far in his recovery. But now, the dog's instincts kicked in like he had never been away. There was no fear, only the sharp, unwavering focus of a canine who had been trained to protect his handler, his family. Tom rolled down the window slightly, his breath steady despite the storm raging in his chest. As he reached for his phone to text Jack and Martha, the black SUV's engine revved, signaling the start of a cat-and-mouse game that Tom had been preparing for, whether he was ready or not. "Stay calm, Shadow," Tom whispered, his voice a mixture of reassurance and warning. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." The moment Tom tried to back up, the SUV sped toward him, blocking any chance of escape. He gripped the wheel tighter, cursing under his breath. Every instinct screamed that they were being boxed in, but the dog at his side remained composed, scanning the environment with laser-like focus. Shadow's ears perked up, and Tom followed his gaze. In the distance, two more vehicles had appeared, flanking them, their engines humming in the quiet night air. There was no more running, no more hiding. They had reached the point of no return. The corruption, the lies, the cover-ups, they all converged on this moment. Tom's fingers clenched into fists, his mind set on one singular goal: expose the truth, no matter the cost. A man in a dark suit stepped out of the black SUV, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Tom's blood ran cold as he recognized the figure. Reynolds, Tom muttered under his breath. The financial advisor, the man who had been connected to the shady dealings at the shelter. His presence here meant only one thing. They were not just playing for the truth anymore. They were playing for their lives. "Sergeant Miller," Reynolds said smoothly, his voice cold and calculated. "You've gone too far. It's time to stop this." Tom's heart raced, but his resolve remained firm. He knew what was at stake. He had already lost so much: his wife, his trust in the system, his peace of mind. But Shadow was still with him. And Shadow had already shown him the way forward. "We're not stopping," Tom said, his voice steady, eyes never leaving Reynolds. "This is bigger than you. You can't silence me anymore." Reynolds took a slow step toward Tom's vehicle, his eyes flicking between Tom and Shadow. A small, cynical smile crept across his face. "You really think you can win this? You and your dog alone? Against all of us?" Before Tom could respond, a voice rang out from behind him, sharp and clear. "He's not alone." Martha appeared from the shadows, standing strong, her eyes fixed on Reynolds. Behind her, Jack emerged, his hand on his weapon, ready for whatever came next. The team had assembled. The truth was about to be exposed. Reynolds' smile faltered, and Tom could see the fear beginning to creep into his eyes. He had been playing a game with Tom, one he thought he could control. But now the tables had turned. "Back off, Reynolds," Tom said, his voice filled with quiet authority. "This ends now." Reynolds hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the vehicles that flanked them. The men inside them were waiting for orders. But for the first time, Reynolds realized that the power he thought he wielded was slipping from his grasp. The web of lies, deceit, and criminal activity he had been spinning was unraveling before his eyes. The truth was coming for him, and there was no escaping it. Shadow's growl broke the silence, a deep, resonant sound that sent chills down Tom's spine. The dog had been through hell, but he had never forgotten who he was. And now, he was ready to finish what he had started. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a survivor, and he wasn't going to let Reynolds or anyone else get away with what they had done. Reynolds' face twisted in fury as he realized that his time was up. "You don't know what you're up against," he spat. "You don't know who you're dealing with." But Tom's resolve only hardened. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and you're done." The next moments unfolded in a blur. Tom and his team moved with precision, disarming Reynolds' men before they had a chance to react. Shadow moved alongside Tom, his every step a reminder of the bond they shared, a bond that had been tested, broken, and rebuilt. They were no longer just cop and canine. They were brothers in arms, fighting for justice. Reynolds was arrested, his ties to the shelter's operations exposed in full. The evidence Tom had gathered, both from Shadow's behavior and the hidden documents, was enough to bring the whole operation down. And when the police raided the shelter the next morning, they found even more evidence: hidden files, training logs, and damning recordings that painted a clear picture of corruption and abuse spanning years. But the victory came at a price. The weeks that followed were filled with both triumph and loss. The department was forced to reckon with the truth, and the extent of the corruption was staggering. Shadow's story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that no matter how broken something is, it can always be rebuilt. And as the community rallied behind Tom and Shadow, they began to heal together. Tom stood at Martha's grave, the weight of her loss pressing heavily on his chest. She had given everything to help them bring the truth to light. Shadow stood beside him, as always, his eyes alert and watchful. "Some things are worth dying for," Tom whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He had learned that lesson the hard way, but in the end, it was the truth that had triumphed. As he stood there, the wind carrying the scent of the earth and the promise of a new day, Tom knew that Shadow's journey wasn't over. They had survived the worst. But now it was time to rebuild, time to honor those they had lost and fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. In this story, we witness the power of loyalty, resilience, and justice. Tom and Shadow's journey was never just about finding the truth. It was about overcoming the darkness that threatened to consume them both. Their partnership, forged through years of hardship, was the key to exposing the corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. This story reminds us that no matter the obstacles we face, there's always a path forward, and sometimes that path is found through the most unlikely of partnerships. What did you think of this story? Let us know your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Have you ever had a dog that showed unwavering loyalty or helped you overcome challenges? We would love to hear your stories. And don't forget to subscribe to the HeartForce channel for more powerful, inspiring stories about dogs and their incredible impact on our lives.